Hi, I'm Peter Kalmstrom of kalmstrom.com Business Solutions. In this demonstration, I'll go through the usage of Pivot Explorer for SharePoint. As you see, I am in one of the reports here. I'm in the appropriations reports for the projects list. And let's go back one step so I'll just see what we're building on here. We're building on a SharePoint list with about 1,500 rows of different projects and their statuses and how much money has been appropriated and when it was appropriated, stuff like that. SharePoint is really good at keeping track of changes in data and creating views. But creating overviews is traditionally done with Excel. And of course, you can export to Excel and build your own reports. But what I've done with Pivot Explorer is make that pivot experience part of SharePoint itself. So I have this button here, and this of course is showing up both in the classic and the modern experience. And now I'm showing this in the subscription edition just because it's slightly faster on my internet connection, but it works the same on all versions from 2013 all the way up to SharePoint Online. So you just go into your list and press the button and it goes to another page, pivotexplorer.aspx. And what it does is that it loads all the data and it also loads the reports that are defined for this list. So for this list, we have 3 different reports. That's the top here. If I want to create another one, I just start with the one that's closest to my goal, and then I simply press plus, and then I have another one. So now I just press test there, and as you see, I got a test one there. And now they're exactly the same, but I can change the graph type to be a line, for example, there. And now that should be saved. Test, and there we go, test, and that's saved. As you see, there is a line graph in that now. So that's how the reports work. Reports are stored here. If I go into site contents here, as you see there in PE reports, there are my reports. So now there was a new one. And that contains, first of all, the name of the report, and then which list it's connected to, and then the definition of the report, which contains all kinds of formatting and which data is where, and also how this is formatted and which graph type it is. So let's get back to the actual Pivot Explorer here and go through everything. First of all, we have the reports, as I've already gone through. And second of all, we have this part here, the pivot part, and that has a few different parts also. Here's the rows and the columns, and that's what you define here in fields. You can define exactly what's going on the rows and what's going on the columns and which filters should be available. Here are all the columns that are taken from the SharePoint list. As you see, the modified and created are there, and the start date is a custom field, and also created by and modified by our built-in SharePoint fields that are there. So if I want to change this somehow, I can just do that. So I can do, instead of having the status there in my report, I can take that away and put the region in there instead. Let's apply that now. And there you see you got the regions here on the rows in the test list there. If I click back here, now you see, yes, it's saving that the region is on my rows automatically. That's the main part, the pivot part of the Pivot Explorer product. And as you see, it shows me measures. Those are the calculations. It shows me rows and it shows me columns. I can also format this data here. First of all, I can format the cells. And I can choose which values, all values, or some amount, for example. And here is some spacing, some decimal places, currency symbols, stuff like that. These settings, by the way, apply to the current report and all reports that are created based on that one, of course. So that's inherited in that way. But if I change here, if I change the currency on this port here, pick some amount there and I put euros instead there, that applies to the test report, but it doesn't apply to the status report there. So if you're starting this from your own list, then I recommend starting with formatting the values there in the way that you want them formatted, and then you build your additional reports based on that. So that's the formatting. I also want to show you here the state here. This is a very important feature, the conditional formatting. And on this report, I have put in a conditional formatting saying that values above 2.5 million should be in yellow, And there's only one of those, as you see, and that of course makes it much easier to see those values that stand out for some reason. And the way you do that is simply go into here, conditional formatting, and then select the rule that you want to have. The sum of amount is greater than 2.5 million, which I've written here. And here you have the formatting. So you can select here either the text or the highlight. And in this case, I've put the highlight, that is the background. I'll put that into yellow. If I make that into green instead and apply that and apply there again, now you see that I have green for the highlighting instead. So that's conditional formatting. The columns here, I want to say a bit more about the columns. As you saw, it connects some of the default SharePoint fields, but there are also a lot of them that are not in there. For example, the ID field is kind of pointless to do summaries on, in my opinion. So that I've excluded that. I don't include that. And also there's a lot of built-in ones that I don't include. So I include the basic ones, and the ones that I thought were needed. I also don't include all column types. For example, multi-line fields or multi-value fields. They make for very, very confusing reports or very bad looking reports. So I've excluded those. And also I'm not yet supporting taxonomy fields. That's something that I might add in the future, but for now, those are not supported. But you can also do calculated values. Let me go to the summaries here and show that one. This is showing in the classic experience just to see how it looks there. That's one of the features of Pivot Explorer. It does support both of them. This is all the data there is. There is one number for each person, one number for each month. In the report here, you see I have quarters here, so that data doesn't actually exist. And that is calculated values. So that's something that you can do. So here I have values that I've been adding. To add a calculated value here, I can just put, so if I want summer, for example, well, I can put June plus July plus August. Of course, they're alphabetical. There we go, and call that summer. Now I've done a calculated values, and now I have another column here. There you go, sum of summer got in there. So that's how you do calculated values. Of course, very powerful, and you can do lots of different types of calculations here. Another thing that I wanted to show you is that if I go back here and look at the data, let's just look at the January data here. You can see that this is sorted descending on the total sales value for each person here. And John did not do very well. He just sold for $1,000 there. If I go back to the data here and just do a quick edit here and edit the data for Joan there, that's a January date, and I put 5,000 there instead. And then I just go in here and go on Pivot Explorer. You'll notice that the data is updated right away. Now it's 5,000 there. So there's no catching of the data. It's always the latest data in SharePoint that's showing up. If you start from scratch on a new list, it defaults to something that looks good, but you might want to, change these options and select which fields and which calculations are appropriate for your data. That's report building is definitely a skill, and Pivot Explorer is meant to make that as simple as possible, but your knowledge of building pivot tables in Excel is of course useful. So we've seen the format, we've seen the conditional formatting, we've seen the fields dialog and the calculated values there. In the options, we have some things like the grand totals, if they should be shown or not, the classical form or flat form, stuff like that. Fields, already showing that, and you can export this. This is only export for the actual pivot part. It doesn't export the graph yet, but it exports like a print, opens the print dialog, or exports to HTML, Excel, or PDF. So let's just do that one. I'll do a landscape there, and you'll see that that opens as a pivot. So it shows exactly the data that I currently have in my pivot report. So that's the export. Down here, I've already shown you the type of graph. We have 4 different types of graph, and then we have none. If I select none here, you'll notice that the graph disappears, and of course that's saved with the report also. But you can switch back and forth between that. If you need to remove a report, there's no function for that here. There's no right click or anything there. You simply need to go into Site Contents and go into PE Reports And for example, if I want to remove that one, I can delete it. And also, of course, you have version history here, so you can see exactly who has been modifying that data. And also, if you need for these reports to be read-only, then you make this list read-only. That concludes my demo. I think I've shown you all the features. Please do send me an email or contact me if you have any questions regarding this. Thank you for watching.